On February 1st, President Trump imposed 25% tariffs on nearly all goods imported from Canada. Since then, his administration has engaged in an on-again, off-again trade war with our longtime ally. The tariffs were imposed based on the exaggerated claim that millions of criminals and tons of deadly fentanyl have been pouring over the border into the United States.
Thank you for checking out Canadian Channel News. Today, we are going to look at fentanyl, the dangerous and deadly drug that is causing so many deaths in both Canada, the United States, and around the world, and Canada's part in the drug problem. As you may know, President Trump has pointed his finger at Canada, saying that Canada is participating in the production and trafficking of fentanyl into the United States that is killing so many Americans. And we're going to take a look at the fentanyl connection in Canada, who is making it, how law enforcement is protecting the Canadian citizens, the US citizens from this dangerous drug, and what is actually being done to break the criminal networks that are bringing fentanyl and its precursors into the country, using labs to produce this dangerous drug in our country and then ship it down to the United States through our porous and open border.
And we have to stop fentanyl. It's pouring in from China through Mexico and Canada, and they've got to stop it. And if they don't stop it, the tariffs are going to get worse, a lot worse.
And a lot of people scoffed at that accusation against Canada that Donald Trump made.
A lot of fentanyl comes through.
How many pounds of drugs come across the northern border into the United States is unknown. President Trump claims tremendous amounts of fentanyl pour into the country through Canada. Last year, U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized 43 pounds of fentanyl at the northern border, compared to more than 21,000 pounds confiscated at the U.S.-Mexico border.
And there were a lot of people that were saying that Canada just wasn't bringing in that much fentanyl into the United States. A lot of it was coming in from Mexico. According to this chart produced by USA Facts, in 2025, the current year, from January to May, so last month, there were 3,664 pounds of fentanyl seized at the southern border, with a comparison of just 47 pounds of fentanyl seized at the northern border in Canada. So you can look at that either two ways. You can say, well, Canada isn't sending in as much fentanyl into the United States as Mexico, or that it's just not getting detected, it's not getting caught. So Canada has a massive border with the United States. Much of it is unprotected. And so that's a lot of entry points that people can use to send the fentanyl from Canada into the United States. I remember when I lived in Vancouver, I heard of this one guy who used to take a Greyhound bus from Vancouver along the border somewhere, got off the bus in the middle of a mountain, high up in the mountains, and he had some skis with him and a backpack, and the bus driver just thought that this guy was going to go skiing, but in his backpack, he had pounds and pounds and pounds of marijuana that he was going to smuggle into the United States. And at that particular place where he got off the bus, strapped on his skis, and skied down a mountain, all the way down the mountain, and somewhere along the line, he crossed into the United States. And that's how he was able to smuggle marijuana from Canada into the United States. This was years ago that I heard this story. It's just one anecdotal example of how people are able to take advantage of this wide open border that Canada and the United States share to be able to smuggle drugs into the country. So let's just take a look at another clip here. What we have is Katarina Schultz. She's a Canadian journalist who is now working with Ironclad, doing podcasts about the Mexican cartels. And in this particular podcast, she is discussing how Canada has become a hub for the Mexican cartels to produce fentanyl in Canada and ship it from Canada into the United States using our very porous and unsecured border that we share with the United States. Let's take a look at this clip now.
Now, it's really important to keep in mind that for the longest time, Canada didn't have a strict visa requirement the way the US did for Mexican nationals looking to just go into Canada on tourist visas. And so during Trump's first administration, the southern border started to kind of get locked down. And because it was so easy for these guys to get to Canada, they were like, all right, let's switch up how we're running operations.
So what's really interesting to note here is that she's saying that the Mexican cartel operatives were coming into the country legally through a tourist visa. This was back when there wasn't any restrictions for Mexican nationals to come into Canada. No visas required other than a tourist visa that they get at the airport upon entry. And then once in the country, they are able to begin their operations and begin to make fentanyl, which would be shipped down to the United States. Over the past few years, mostly in British Columbia, there have been a lot of major fentanyl laboratory busts. These are big time labs that require a lot of skill with experienced cooks who are knowledgeable in the fabrication and synthesis of synthetic drugs, including fentanyl. With these labs in Canada, there has to be the importation or the acquirement of the synthetics needed to produce these drugs, which are called precursors. And a lot of these precursors are coming in through the Port of Vancouver, shipped from China, with many Asian gangs in British Columbia, especially in Vancouver. A lot of these gangsters have familiar ties to people back in China, and they're able to work together in order to procure the precursors and have them shipped to Canada, where they're able to be synthesized into fentanyl and other drugs, including meth.
The major police bust happened in BC's interior, Falkland, home to just 900 people.
I cannot understate the sophistication. Sophisticated by virtue of its size, by virtue of the type of equipment and the setup.
5,000 liters of liquid and 10 tons of powdered chemicals were seized, enough to make 95 million doses of fentanyl, with a value of close to $500 million, according to police.
To me, that's a sign of the fact that they've been allowed to practice and continue without much interference from law enforcement.
Experts say what was found also shows a high level of cooperation between criminal groups. Police say it appears the lab was using a drug formula new to Canada, but used in Mexico.
So what we're talking about here with this bust of this super lab, and this is just one example of a super lab in Canada. There's probably some that are operating right now to this day. But the fact that they were able to bring in 5,000 liters of precursor and 10 tons of powder, presumably some of them may have been acquired in Canada. I don't know a recipe for making fentanyl, so I'm not knowledgeable on that. But you have to think that some of these chemicals did come in through the border, through the Port of Vancouver, and made its way to this laboratory in British Columbia. So this is a major example of how porous our ports are. Consider the amount of chemicals required just for this one lab, and that they were able to bring that into the country and make its way to the interior of British Columbia. So let's just take a look at British Columbia and the Port of Vancouver and just how porous it is here. So what we have here is statistics from the Port of Vancouver's Instagram, and it says the Port of Vancouver handles North America's most diverse range of cargo. Top trading economies 2024 that moved goods through the port were China with 46 million metric tons. So that number is staggering. 46 million metric tons. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of containers. Just taking a look at this article in the Vancouver Sun, more than 1.5 million containers arrive at the 4 terminals within Port Metro Vancouver every year, and the CBSA examines only 50,000 of them, less than 4%. It goes on to say, as the ship is en route to Canada, we get additional information and data that's used to target for contraband. As well, en route, we get information about 96 hours out about the crew and the vessel, so we can then conduct risk assessments on the crew, the vessel, the routings, and things like that.
Intelligence loops also helps to create lookouts in our systems that help to assist the officers with making referrals that are intelligence-based and targeted as opposed to just randomness.
And that intelligence has helped CBSA officers seize nearly 5 kilograms of fentanyl during the first 3 quarters of 24-25. That's a 770% increase over the same period in 2023. It's also helped them stop more than 36 kilograms of heroin and more than 320 kilograms of other opioids from making it into Canada. There's been a significant increase in the amount of precursor chemicals that have been seized at the border. These are the types of chemicals that are used to make fentanyl and MDMA. Is this a result of more training or operational changes?
I think it's a combination of things, like I alluded to earlier, from an intelligence perspective, and that is a trend that we're seeing is precursor chemicals. So within the last month, CBSA undertook an Operation Blizzard, which was meant to have a concentrated 30-day effort on those types of narcotics, like you mentioned, fentanyl, precursor chemicals. We did that type of an operation across the country, and it's resulted in potential investigations for other law enforcement partners, as well as things that CBSA can look at themselves. So definitely an area of focus for us, for sure.
It says here that there was a Operation Blizzard, which Canada Border Services agencies targeted operations to intercept fentanyl and precursors entering and leaving the country, leading to 56 grams being seized, which doesn't sound like very much at all, especially when you consider that fentanyl precursors are coming into the country. And it says here 47 fentanyl labs shut down since 2018. Earlier this year, under the Trudeau administration, a new title was introduced into Canadian vocabularies, and that is the fentanyl czar. His name is Kevin Brosseau, and he is now in charge of Canada's fentanyl crisis. And what are his roles? What are his duties? We'll take a look at this clip and see what is being said about Canada's fentanyl czar.
Fentanyl czar role will be involved in helping to pull all of this together so we can get over any hurdles and execute on a plan that involves minimizing, if not eliminating, fentanyl from Canadian soil.
A senior federal source says the czar could be someone in uniform or ex-police. With Trump giving Canada 1 month to, quote, alleviate the crisis, the new czar will have to hit the ground running.
The government is now reacting when, in fact, we've all seen what fentanyl has done to some segments of our society.
So let's just take a look at what this says here. Canada's fentanyl czar is actively and deeply engaged with U.S. counterparts as both countries continue their close cooperation in dismantling criminal networks and eliminating the flow of fentanyl. By taking a leadership role in collaborating with U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies, Canada is doing its part to disrupt transnational supply chains, limit access to precursor chemicals, and strengthen enforcement at the border. As Mr. Brosseau gets comfortable with his job, one of the first tasks he undertook was a hiring boom for Canada's border protection agencies. The Canada Border Services Agency is Canada's first line of defense at 1,200 ports of entry across the country. Day in and day out, approximately 8,600 frontline personnel play a crucial role protecting our communities and preventing illicit goods and inadmissible people from entering Canada. It goes on to say, the Government of Canada is committed to recruiting 1,000 more RCMP personnel to tackle drug and human trafficking, foreign interference, cybercrime, and the organized criminal gangs, as well as the hiring of over 1,000 additional CBSA personnel, including border services officers, intelligence analysts, and specialized chemists, and the training of up to 9 new detector dog teams.
But the Canadian government did concede to Trump's complaints about the border and announced a nearly $1 billion plan to strengthen border security by adding more boots on the ground, helicopters, and drones.
So our officers behind us also are looking at, and as part of our border plan, enhancements towards export work as well. We want to make sure that either coming into Canada or leaving Canada, that we're catching any contraband that's leaving the country.
In this telling interview that 60 Minutes had with a member of the Sinaloa cartel operating along the Canada-US border, he explains how the cartel has been moving people and drugs from Canada into the US, and sometimes drugs and arms from the United States into Canada. Let's hear what he has to say in this interview with 60 Minutes.
Do you work only with humans or do you move drugs also?
Todo.
Everything.
How much fentanyl do you move across that border?
Lately, it's been quiet, but for a while there, we were bringing in 30 kilos per month.
Wow. The drugs come from de China?
From China.
De China.
I get more into the U.S., but also it goes from the U.S. to Canada and weapons.
With the amount of money that these cartels are making selling illicit drugs on the streets of Canada and the United States, their ingenuity and creativity will always find a way to get drugs across a border. That's something they seem to know. Where there's a will, there's a way. And unfortunately, the cartel is making way too much money from these synthetic drugs just to give it up. They will continue, and it's up to the governments to protect its citizens as best they can.
The border between Canada and the U.S. is much bigger than the one with Mexico. You can always get in.
You'll find another way.
Always.
Thank you for watching our video on the fentanyl crisis in Canada. Please give us a like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We're just starting out, and we appreciate all your support. And we hope to see you next time on the Canadian Channel News.